crafters, thanks so much for dropping by. I'm just starting a bit of a series on mini album making, and what sparked that was that a couple of weeks ago I had some friends and my sister at my house, and my sister wanted to make her own mini album of a trip to Bali that she had, and it was her first one that she'd constructed. It came out great, and she suggested maybe making a video to show everybody what you need, how to construct it, the process that goes into it, that kind of thing. And I have had a few questions throughout the years of people wanting these kinds of videos. Now, there's plenty of people out there that I follow that do them, but I thought I would do some videos myself, and hopefully that's helpful for you. So I've got a bit of a list here. I will have this in the description box if anyone wants it. And I'll try and link some of the things that I use as well. So if you want to go and buy them, you can. But if you have any questions, please drop me a note, let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So I'll just go through this list. So the first thing you're going to need is cutting tools. Now, obviously scissors are a no-brainer. I like these Timholtz scissors specifically because they are Teflon, so they're non-stick. There's 3 sizes. I tend to use this middle size the most. I just find they fit my hand really well. I have small hands, so these ones are a bit unwieldy for me. And these ones are a little bit too small because you can't fit your fingers as easily in them, but these ones are terrific. They'll cut through anything. So if you need to cut chipboard, these do it no problem at all. And these are probably the ones that I would recommend. They come with a black handle now, but you can get Timholtz tonic scissors pretty much at all crafting stores. So I'd highly recommend a pair of those. The other thing I would suggest you have is some form of craft knife. Now, I've used many craft knives over the years. I like this one. This is a Stanley knife from Bunnings, which is our local hardware store. And I like this one because the blades in it have these little grooves, and when one piece gets dull, you snap it off and you can keep going, so that's really handy. In order to use this, you'll actually need a self-healing mat to cut on. Don't cut on your glass mat if you have a glass mat. As much as they say it doesn't cut them, it does. I've done it, so I would suggest not doing that. And the other thing I like to use with sharp tools is a metal-edged ruler. So this one's called the Perfect Ruler. Unfortunately, they don't make them anymore, which is such a shame because it is perfect. It's got this sort of non-slip bar that when you push down, it doesn't move. And I like having my fingers away from where I'm cutting. It makes me feel more comfortable. Pretty sure we, our memory keepers, have one. I think it's a bit bigger. It might be 14 inches, but that one is supposed to be really good as well. The other one I use all the time while we're talking about rulers and cutting is this one. So this is a Timholtz ruler, and it's got a metal edge. It's a centering ruler, so it starts at 0 and you can measure from a center point, which is really cool. But this metal edge is useful, so I actually do cut with both of them, and I like that it's nice and wide. So again, you can keep your fingers away from what you're cutting, but absolutely use whatever you feel comfortable with. I wouldn't suggest using a plastic ruler without a metal edge because you can really easily cut into your ruler. I've also done that. But the other thing you can use is just a plain old metal ruler from any hardware store or stationery store. That works just fine. Yeah, but again, I probably wouldn't use a plastic ruler to do that. This one's a T ruler. I do think this is really valuable in crafting because you can just line up really easily against the edge of something, but I probably wouldn't cut with something like this. So highly recommend a T ruler as well. These are really hard to get in Australia. There's a craft store, Create by Me Studio, owned by Mel Barwise, that does stock these. I'm not aware of anywhere else in Australia you can get them. In America, they're easy to get, Simon Says Stamp and things like that, but yeah, really useful. So they're the sort of scissors / rulers that I use. But of course, the other cutting tools that you need to make mini albums, or pretty much any crafting, is a trimmer. So I like this one. I use this one a lot for traveling or for card making because it's got the 6-inch base. This is a Fiskars Trimmer. It's just a standard sort of blade. I like the titanium blades. They last a little bit longer. But what I do, if I know I'm going to have to cut chipboard, I keep an old blade, and this is pretty much worn off, but I just use a Sharpie and put a C on it so that you know that it's your chipboard blade. And if you do have to cut chipboard, what you'll find is that this little blade probably isn't deep enough to go all the way through. So it's really good to use this to score the chipboard, and then I would go back through with the craft knife on a self-healing mat with a metal ruler, use that cut mark as a track and just cut through all the way. That way you're better off making a number of lighter cuts rather than pushing too hard, because you can sort of go off and make cuts you don't mean to. So that's a really good trimmer. But the one that I love, I don't travel with it though, it's just too big, is my Big Mama Jumma Fiskars Precision Trimmer. It's a rotary self-sharpening trimmer. So this housing is on two metal rails, so it's always straight and it cuts through everything like butter. It cuts chipboard, no problem. I tend not to do that because I have a slight worry that, you know, it could damage the blade. It hasn't so far. I do it sometimes, but really love this trimmer. Especially when you're making mini albums, you can go through a blade or two really easily when you're cutting heaps and heaps and heaps of cardstock and paper, and it just dulls your blades and you get that furry edge, which I don't like on the edge of your papers. So this one's been a really good investment. Highly recommend it. It does lock shut, so you can take it with you. It's just a bit unwieldy for me, but it opens up to a full platform, so that's really helpful when you've got, you know, large pieces of cardstock and chipboard. Love this trimmer, love it for home, but I probably wouldn't use it for travel so much. But yeah, I think a number of different options are good. It just depends when and where you're going to be crafting as to what's going to suit you best. So there's those. I think there's a couple of other things I'll go through, and I think one of the main things is adhesives. So these are my two preferred wet adhesives: Scotch Tacky glue and Art Glitter Dries Clear adhesive. Make sure you get the dries clear because this does come in one that doesn't dry clear. I do have a metal top that goes on this Art Glitter glue, which means that you can get really fine amounts of glue out, which is fantastic. And I've added this Scrap Perfect, I think it's a medium nozzle. I actually think Ranger might have come out with one that fits this size bottle as well, but this one's Scrap Perfect because you don't want big globs of glue, although you do want to be able to get into the corners. Look, the Scotch Tacky does come with a fine-ish tip, but I prefer using them like that. So they're my two favourite glues. You use whatever you want and whatever works for you, but I like these because they do dry quite quickly. They give you a little bit of wriggle room, but once they're adhered, they're clear and they aren't going anywhere. They're super strong and I've never had a problem with them, so highly recommend those. The other thing I use a lot is my Scotch Advanced Tape Glider, or ATG as they're commonly known. This is fantastic. I go through so much tape when I'm making mini albums. Now, I don't use this for construction of pages or covers or hinges. All I use this for is decoration. So adhering pattern paper to your base pages and things like that. This is awesome. These tape rolls that I get, I buy them by the case when there's Black Friday sales on from a place in the US called Tape Jungle. It works out so much cheaper, even with the Aussie dollar conversion, even with shipping. You just have to drop them an email and they're very happy to quote you a shipping price, but I've still got tons left from the last order that I did, but they're all acid free, which is a bonus. And I think it works out, last time it was about $1.50 a roll Australian, whereas it's about $13 for a 2-pack. So it's much, much cheaper to buy it that way. And when you're making mini albums and going through so much adhesive, we're all looking for ways to save a little bit of money where we can. Now, the other thing that you will need is dry adhesive for construction. Now, love Redline tape. It is super strong, but the red backing is really staticky and it goes everywhere, which is super frustrating. So I've only got one little bit left. But it will adhere really well. And the other thing is you can't tear it, but this stuff will not come off your projects. It's fantastic for making hinges and for cover construction, especially along the moving parts, along the spine hinge area. It's fantastic, highly recommend that. However, what I've been using of late, I had a trip to the US a couple of weeks ago, and this Kraft's tape is actually rebranded Miracle Tape. And it's actually the same tape that the Las Vegas stamps sell, which is the same quality as Scor tape. So this or Scor tape, fantastic, very strong high tack tape, which is also heat resistant. You can tear it, which is great. It's not super staticky like the release paper or release plastic of the Redline tape. This is awesome. So I use this tape for wrapping my covers, for adhering along moving parts, so hinges and things like that, and it does not come off. I love it, and it comes in all sorts of different widths, which is really useful. Now, for the Australians, this is the tape that we can get most easily at our crafting stores. This is not the same. There is a high-tack version of this tape, which I have. It is not the same. So if you want your albums to be durable and to last, highly recommend either Scor tape, Miracle tape, which is Crafters tape, same thing, rebranded, or Redline tape. There's no substitute. I think if you're, wanting to give it as a gift, the last thing you would want after spending all your time and effort planning, creating, decorating, and the money on the supplies is to cheap out on the adhesive and have it come apart. That's not what we want. So those are what I would recommend for the adhesives. Now, there's a couple of other tools I like to use. I think what's really important though is a good bone folder. Now, this is a Teflon bone folder. It was about 20 something dollars. I can't remember exactly. It was a while back that I bought it, but this is a medium size, I'm pretty sure, Teflon bone folder. I got this from Simon Says Stamp many, many years ago. You can buy them from bookbinding places and things like that. The reason it's expensive is the material it's made out of, and honestly, if you try it, you'll never go back. It's so smooth. It's got a rounded point, so it doesn't tear your paper. And it also doesn't leave that shiny mark that bone folders leave on your paper. I hate that. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend getting one of these. Love it. It's a life changer, game changer, this one. Now, I also use a Scoreboard. You don't have to use a Scoreboard. You can use the track of your trimmer. But when you're making hinges, this thing makes it so much easier. And again, mine came with a stylus. This is a Stampin' Up one. There's so many brands. They're all great. I don't use that. I use my Teflon bone folder when I'm scoring, and just to make your hinges, it's fantastic. So Scoreboard of some description and a Teflon bone folder just make mini album making fun and easy, and I would highly recommend it. Now, obviously you're going to need to construct a mini album, so you'll need a couple of things. Medium weight chipboard. This is the backing off a 12 by 12 paper pad that I either save or I have friends that save them for me. I'm very lucky in that way, but you can buy them. I know Graphics, Grafix is a brand that sells them. But yeah, you need chipboard of some description to make your cover, and you want one that's not going to sort of be too flimsy and bend. I tend to use white, black or Kraft for a number of things. So I'll either wrap my cover in chipboard. Sometimes I do it with straight pattern paper, but the cardstock weight pattern paper, don't use the really thin stuff, it won't work. But your base pages need to be of a colour and your hinges need to be of a colour. So they're the three that I use. I tend to use these two the most. Now, these in Australia, I use the Quill brand from Officeworks. It's the cheapest, it works really well, it makes great hinges. It's flexible enough so that the hinges aren't too stiff, but it's strong enough so that your pages will hold up. And I just use those cardstocks for most things. But I would probably suggest if you're in the US, something like Recollections would work well, but you probably want different weights. Like a 65 pound I'd probably recommend for hinges, and something like an 80 or 110 for pages, depending on how many flips and flaps and things. But you will need cardstock and chipboard. Now, in my mind, there's a couple of things that I use that I sort of think about as optional. I'm an inker, so I like to ink the edges of my pages and layering pages, not all the time, but often I do. My preferred ink to do that is Distress ink. Now, these are the mini cubes. You can get these in 3 packs individually. You can get the big ones. I've got all of them. And you can also use Distress oxides. I use that too. But whatever ink you have, I'm sure will be fine. Probably pigment ink is not ideal because it takes a long time to dry and will smudge, but any dye-based ink is fine. And I tend to use blacks and browns for edging. Now, I like the square ink blending tools to do that because they don't roll away, so where I put it down, it's gonna stay. This isn't my preferred for ink blending, for card making and things like that, but for this purpose, I like that. Now, I'm not fussy, I need to replace this sponge, but I just have one sponge on there for mini albums. It's just called Random Brown. Whichever brown I happen to use on it gets used on it, so there's that. I like to have a sanding block of some description handy. I've got a whole heap of them, but this is really handy for smoothing off rough edges of papers or chipboards, so I'd recommend that. And tape of some description is handy because you need to keep things in place, or even for reinforcing you know, pieces of chipboard, it's handy to hold them in place with tape. One more thing I'll mention, it depends how many pages are going in your book, how often it's going to be used and how strong you want it to be, but I've got some of this Kraft text, which is sort of like paper fabric to use, and I'm going to try this out on my albums, but it's inkable, cuttable, stickable, all that stuff, so that's one option. You can also use duct tape or fabric tape on your spine just to reinforce it and make sure that it's durable and not going to come apart, because ultimately it's only held together by some adhesive and cardstock, so that's a good option as well. And a lot of people use, the words escape me, but you know, like the prepaid express post envelopes from the post office, you can use Tyvek, that's what it's called, Tyvek, to reinforce your mini albums as well. So if you want to do that, go ahead. You don't have to, absolutely not. Most people doing tutorials don't reinforce them, but for gifts and things like that, I generally just add one more layer of protection just to make sure that they are going to stay together and stand the test of time. So for me, that is what I consider the must-haves in terms of tools and supplies that you need to construct mini albums. Your choice of these things is completely up to you. It's all personal preference. There's no right or wrong. And you can make a mini album with really minimal supplies if you need to. But if you have any questions, or there's anything you need more explanation on, or you want to know where to get some of these things, please reach out, let me know. Happy to answer any questions. I have a Facebook page, Pieces of Me. You can reach out to me there. Instagram, all those kinds of things. You can see my details below, but happy to help if that's of use to you. Thanks for dropping by, and I will go through next the process of how I plan out a mini album, and then we will actually make one. So I'll break them up into smaller sections so they're easy to use and refer to when you need to. But thanks for coming on the journey, and I look forward to seeing hopefully some finished mini albums. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon.